Hello, and welcome to this special edition of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hi, Ray.
And it's been quite a week, hasn't it, Graham?
It certainly has, Ray.
Which is why we're doing this special episode, to try and make sense of what's happened, why, and what it might mean.
And while you've been working hard, I've been sitting at home tweeting about it. So do you want to do a quick summary of the week's headlines, and then we'll maybe take each one in turn and talk about it in a bit more detail?
Yes, why don't I do that? I thought I'd start my homework for this special edition on the news page of the Estonian regulator.
Oh, Ray, you really do get all the exciting jobs, don't you?
Oh yes, although I'm willing to bet there have been very few occasions in the history of the Estonian FSA when they've put out 5 press releases on money laundering in the space of 3 days.
5?
Yep, it's been a busy week in Estonia, and Denmark and Sweden in fact.
Go on.
Well, it all started on Tuesday, the 19th of February, when the Estonian FSA issued an extraordinary press release chucking Danske Bank out of the country and giving them an 8-month deadline to vacate.
And that's pretty much unprecedented, isn't it?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
Okay, lots to talk about there. And the next one?
The same day, they announced that the European Banking Authority, the EBA, had opened a formal investigation into both the Danish and Estonian financial supervisory authorities.
Also unprecedented?
2 out of 2, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and the third press release?
Well, on the 20th of February, which was the next day, they issued an explanatory notice following stories in the press about Swedbank and its links to the Danske money.
Okay, Swedbank is a fairly new arrival to the Danske story, but it's certainly arrived with a bang. Another one to talk about in a minute, I think. And number 4.
Well, also issued on the 20th, number 4 progressed a bit of a long-running spat between the Estonian and Danish regulators, where they've indulged in a bit of finger-pointing and blame-shaming. Both have started releasing previously private correspondence to try and lay the blame on the other.
Oh, nice. Just what you need when you're trying to resolve a major money laundering scandal. Well, that should also be interesting. And finally,
returning to the Swedbank affair, the Estonian and Swedish regulators issued a joint statement about the ongoing reports.
Which gives me a wonderful chance to name drop, as I met the head of the Swedish FSA on my recent visit to Denmark.
Yeah, and I need to work out where I'm going wrong here, Graham. I get to spend my evenings reading press releases from the Estonian regulator while you go swanning off to Copenhagen to rub shoulders with the rich and famous, for certain values of rich and famous, obviously.
Well, yeah, doesn't sound quite so glamorous when you put it like that, does it? But serendipity is a strange thing, and, Ray, as you know, my life lately has been nothing if not serendipitous.
Indeed. Looking at those Estonian press releases, and of course we'll need to look at the stories coming from the other side, I think we should start with Swedbank, as there's probably not too much to talk about at the moment, although that could clearly change sometime soon.
Agreed. All right, so what did those 2 press releases say?
The first one effectively just references the media stories that have started talking about Swedbank playing a bigger role in the Danske laundromat than hitherto reported, and it makes the point that these are just press stories and not coming from law enforcement agencies.
Okay, but it was a press story that presaged the Danske affair, though, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It also makes the perfectly valid point that all the money flowing into, and more importantly out of, Danske Estonia had to go somewhere. And it would be wrong to assume that every bank that received Danske money was implicated in wrongdoing.
And that has merits, unless, of course, the bank was holding accounts for, well, let's say, corporate entities who were themselves part of the washing process, and for whom the bank had incomplete or fraudulent documentation, or where they'd failed dismally to ensure that they were confident about the source of the funds flowing through their accounts.
That's exactly right. And to be fair, the Estonian FSA makes the point in their press release that the further down the chain you move, the harder it gets.
Yeah, but, the point of identifying ultimate beneficial owners in the case of corporates is to try and remedy those issues in the chain of transactions, which means, where banks don't really do that job properly and they end up with a KYC for what are in effect proxy owners, that definitely facilitates the ease with which money's laundered.
Yeah, it does.
Anything else on Swedbank? You said there was a joint statement with the Swedish FSA.
Yes, the following day they put out another statement following reports on Swedish television that Swedbank may have been used over a period of 12 years for extensive money laundering amounting to billions of dollars, with reports stating that Swedbank also maintain accounts with the same customers as Danske, for which they had no addresses or contact numbers, but which operated out of the same addresses as the Danske accounts.
Oh, lordy. So, as we just said then, while banks further down the chain have a harder time of it, holding proper due diligence and conducting effective transaction monitoring are essential at all times. And, it appears from the reports that neither of these may have happened with some of these accounts at Swedbank.
Yes, and it isn't just the press reports. The head of the Swedish FSA, your mate, Erik Thedéen, was quoted in the press as saying that some of the transactions should quite clearly have been reported. And they've now asked EY to conduct an external investigation.
Yeah, and as I understand it, it's been given quite aggressive timelines in which to report.
Yes, by the end of March, I understand, which, as we recalled, is only 5 weeks away.
Yeah, so this may not be the last of the Dark Money Files special episodes, I think.
Well, you could be right, especially as the Swedbank accounts appear to be spread over Latvia and Lithuania as well. And according to the press, these accounts have links to offshore entities in places like the British Virgin Islands and Belize.
And, Ray, I have little doubt that the accounts concerned will be peppered with UK LLPs and LPs as well.
That wouldn't be a surprise, Graham.
OK, well, that's a story we'll undoubtedly be coming back to. So let's turn our attention back to Danske. The first story was the ousting of Danske from Estonia. Now, that came as a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing any press speculation about it in the run-up.
No, me neither. And the timelines here are quite aggressive too, aren't they?
Yes, they've effectively been given 8 months to pack up and leave, during which time they have to return all of their deposits to the account holders and find new homes for all the money they've lent.
OK, so we should chat about what we think provoked this action, Ray. Any thoughts?
I think the fact that the EBA announced a formal investigation on the same day can't be a coincidence.
No, I think you're right, and this ongoing disagreement between the two regulators is clearly an issue.
Yeah, so let's come to both of those in a bit more detail shortly. I think we should finish talking about the exit of Danske first.
Well, you'll be pleased to hear that I did a bit of homework this week as well.
Oh, did you?
Well, it's no need to sound quite so surprised. and yes, I did. The Estonian FSA actually issued a fact sheet about Danske, which makes for quite interesting reading, if you like fact sheets.
Which I know you do.
Yes, well, anyway, move on. It says that Danske's market share in Estonia by assets is just under 5%, the bulk of which is made up of loans at just over €1 billion and a small amount of deposits at just under €100 million.
That's a decent-sized loan portfolio they're going to need to divest themselves of. Does the fact sheet say what they consist of?
Yeah, it's a split about 50-50 between loans to legal entities and private loans. The overwhelming majority of the private loans are housing loans. As for the legal entity side, there's some local government lending at just under 15% and a bit to central government, but the remainder must be just, I guess, general business lending.
And they've got to offload all that lending in the next 8 months.
Yes, or in the words of the Estonian FSA, if it can't, it needs to find some other lawful solution for how those loan contracts can be served, provided that customer interests are adequately protected.
OK. That may prove to be an interesting challenge. What happens if they don't, Graham?
Well, that gets interesting. They will be subject to a fine of €100,000 a day for each day they breach this order, up to a maximum of 10% of the total turnover of Danske Bank AS, which is the maximum allowable by law.
Whew, they mean business, don't they? Let's look at this from the customer point of view, though, because I reckon most, if not all of that lending is to genuine, law-abiding individuals and businesses. This is likely to cause them difficulties, isn't it?
Yes, I should think so. I mean, when you think about what a pain it is to move your mortgage to a different bank in normal times, then imagine doing it when thousands of other customers are trying to do the same thing, tying up all the mortgage staff at pretty much every bank in the country. There's some, I think, considerable stress that will be spread around Estonia.
And for businesses too?
Yeah, if you think about how reliant you can be as a business that's borrowing money to a bank that understands your business plan and is committed to supporting it, changing banks is no small matter. I think businesses will suffer even just from the uncertainty. They will be less ready to commit to investment, for instance, while they try to refinance.
And might the bank be able to just sell some of the debt on so that customers don't get a say in who their new lender is?
Well, yeah, that can sometimes happen, and given the timescale that's been set here, it must be tempting if Danske can do such a deal just to sell off tranches of loan in big chunks.
Graham, that sounds to me uncomfortably like the mortgage bonds and latterly CDOs that precipitated the financial crisis.
Yes, but I'm sure that with the regulators so closely involved and conscious of the lessons of 2008, that just won't be allowed to happen again.
I worry that the cost of €100,000 a day is a great incentive to act quickly and cut corners, but, maybe I'm worrying unnecessarily and it will all be fine.
Well, I think we'll see. There's a couple of other things worth mentioning from the fact sheet. One is that Danske still employs 238 people in Estonia, so that's a bit tough on them. Presumably they're going to lose their jobs. And the other thing is that despite shutting down the non-resident portfolio, the bank still holds €8.6 million in non-resident deposits.
Do we know any more than that?
No, we do know from the B&H report that the bank has always had non-resident accounts outside of the specific non-resident portfolio, so I guess these deposits relate to those accounts.
Anything else?
Just that it's very clear from the fact sheet how small the entire Estonian operation is in relation to Danske's overall business. In terms of overall assets, loans, deposits and profit, it represents significantly less than 1% of their entire business. So the removal is more of a reputational issue than a financial one.
But it is a big reputational hit.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about the EBA investigation next then.
Away you go.
The same day as the Estonian FSA ousted Danske, the EBA formally announced an investigation into the conduct of both the Estonian and Danish regulatory bodies. They make clear that this announcement follows preliminary inquiries into both institutions, so I think we can be sure that they knew it was coming.
Which, let's be honest, tends to reinforce the opinion that the ouster wasn't coincidental.
It does. The EBA has indicated that it particularly wants to understand whether any EU laws were broken during the period that the laundromat was operating.
So what prompted this, Ray?
Well, €200 billion of dark money going through Danske Estonia over a 10-year period?
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't put that very well. Sorry, I meant what particularly prompted the EBA investigation now?
Well, okay, see what you mean. The European Commission wrote asking them to investigate whether there had been what is known as a BUL, a breach of union law.
Oh, I guess that's pretty serious.
Oh yes, it's got capital letters and everything. There's a very interesting quote from the head of the Estonian FSA on their website.
Really?
Yeah, it says, and I'm quoting verbatim, "We are sure that the EBA will treat the supervisors equally, and that the same thorough process will be conducted vis-à-vis other similar cases that are currently known about and other financial supervisors of those countries that have discovered such cases."
Ooh, that's both quite cryptic and a bit pointed, isn't it?
Yes. The Danish FSA has been a bit more reticent about the EBA inquiry, simply noting on its website that both national and international inquiries have been launched, including by the EBA, the Danish National Audit Office and the IMF.
They've been a bit less reticent about correspondence between themselves and the Estonian FSA, though, haven't they?
Yes. They've published a couple of letters, historical letters, which appear to show them reacting, in their view, properly and proportionately, to the events in Estonia as they were unfolding.
Ah, and the Estonian FSA?
Well, they immediately came back with the view that they thought publishing just these 2 letters was misleading, as they cannot be read in isolation and should have been published along with the entire chain of letters over the years.
Did they? So, I know we've already used this word a lot today, Ray, but this is all really quite unprecedented.
It is. The Estonian FSA goes on to list a number of other letters that they sent to the Danes, and also recalls the fact that there was no reply at all from the Danish FSA to one important letter relating to an on-site inspection. This on-site inspection was followed by a report of more than 300 pages.
Whoa, I bet that made for interesting reading.
I bet it did. They also point out that the European Banking Directive allows home country supervisors, the Danish FSA in this case, the right to carry out inspections on the host country, provided they inform the host regulator first. And I don't think they ever did.
Anything else?
Yeah, the Estonian regulator has invited the Danish regulator to agree to make public all the supervisory documentation in relation to Danske as far as the law allows. It finished by saying that the Danish regulator published the Estonian FSA's letter to them without permission.
Wow. So no doubt they are pretty hacked off then.
Yes, which does rather put into context the requirement for Danske to leave.
It sure does. Okay, so let's just step back and summarise what we've got so far. The Danish and Estonian regulators are involved in what seems to be a very public argument over who was at fault and who wasn't. The EU has instructed the EBA to conduct a formal investigation into both, whilst at the same time the Swedish regulator is now investigating events over the past 10 or so years at Swedbank by appointing an independent investigation headed by EY, which might possibly also identify deficiencies in the Swedish regulator's oversight and drag them into this investigation as well.
Not to mention that there are also investigations ongoing at another large Scandinavian bank, Nordea, following a letter from Bill Browder's Hermitage Capital Management. Also, criminal investigations in both Italy and France, and ongoing investigations in Denmark, the UK and the US.
And on which subject, in case it had escaped people's attention, the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, announced on Thursday that is also, in addition to the US Department of Justice, opening an investigation into the Danske affair.
It's never going to end, is it, Graham? And of course, we can't end this episode without mentioning that Danske Bank also announced this week that it's voluntarily terminating its remaining business in Latvia, Lithuania and Russia, as well as Estonia.
So, realistically, what was once Sampo Bank is now no more.
Yes, although it doesn't necessarily mean that the problem has gone away entirely, given that the Swedbank investigation is also going to cover the bank's activities in Latvia and Lithuania, which, given Danske's presence there, means there may be more bad news on the way.
Okay, well that's brought our listeners up to date on a week of really quite extraordinary events.
Yep, extraordinary is the word. I must confess that as the week has progressed, I've developed this image of the two regulators as lager louts jostling one another outside a nightclub they've just both been ejected from. Each loudly declaring it was the other's fault and getting ready for a good old-fashioned punch-up.
You just then, who's going to be the girlfriend at the side saying, "No, he's not worth it." That's a fantastic analogy. Brilliant.
So what's next?
Well, provided we have a bit of a quieter week next week, we're going to have what is now a very timely look at the B&H report and specifically focus on the financial crime controls and systems and policies which have so manifestly failed to work for Danske and Estonia, and talk about why that might have happened.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dark Money Files. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or your normal podcast provider. Thanks.